Standing in the lobby of Callaway and Associates at 9 in the morning, watching my husband of 8 years pack his personal belongings into cardboard boxes, while his secretary Natalie Brooks stood beside him with tears streaming down her face, I couldn't help but smile. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Not because my marriage was ending, but because neither of them had any idea that in exactly 30 minutes, Natalie would be sitting across from me in a conference room, learning that the woman whose husband she'd stolen was actually the CEO of Evergreen Marketing Solutions, the parent company that held the contract keeping her paycheck coming every 2 weeks. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor, and today it was about to deliver the punchline of a lifetime. 3 months earlier, I thought I had everything figured out. My name is Rachel Winters, and at 34, I'd built what most people would consider a dream life in Portland, Oregon. My marketing company, Evergreen Marketing Solutions, had grown from a small startup I'd launched in my garage to a multi-million-dollar enterprise with offices in 3 states. David Callaway, my husband, ran his own consulting firm, and we lived in a beautiful craftsman home in the Pearl District, complete with the white picket fence and 2 rescue dogs. What I didn't know was that David had been living a double life for the better part of a year, conducting an affair with Natalie Brooks, the 26-year-old executive assistant he'd hired 6 months into our marriage. What made it even more delicious was that David's consulting firm was completely dependent on the contract they had with my company, a detail I'd never bothered to mention to him because I preferred to keep my business and personal life separate. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a rainy Tuesday evening in February. I'd come home early from a client meeting, hoping to surprise David with dinner from the Riverside Grill, his favorite restaurant. The house was dark when I pulled into our driveway, which was unusual since David typically worked from his home office on Tuesdays. I called out as I entered through the front door, but only our golden retriever Max came bounding down the stairs to greet me. David's home office door was closed, which wasn't unusual, but I could hear his voice through the thin walls. He was speaking in that low, intimate tone he used to use with me during our early dating days, the one that made my stomach flutter with butterflies. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself pressing my ear against the door. "No, sweetheart, Rachel's stuck in meetings until at least 8 tonight," David was saying, his voice warm with affection I hadn't heard directed at me in months. "We have plenty of time. Why don't you come over around 6? I'll order from that Thai place you love." My heart began to race as the pieces clicked into place. The late nights at the office, the sudden interest in working out, the new cologne, the way he'd started password protecting his phone, all the classic signs I'd been too busy or too trusting to notice. "I miss you too, baby," David continued, and I had to grip the doorframe to steady myself. "Just a few more weeks and we can stop sneaking around. I promise I'm going to tell Rachel soon. This whole charade is killing me." I backed away from the door slowly, my mind reeling. 8 years of marriage, and he was planning to leave me for someone he called baby. The takeout bag slipped from my numb fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud, but David was too absorbed in his conversation to notice. Instead of confronting him immediately, I made a decision that would change everything. I grabbed my purse and keys and drove straight to Blue Mountain Cafe, a small coffee shop downtown where I knew I could think clearly. Sitting in a corner, booth with a steaming mug of coffee, I tried to process what I'd just heard. The rational part of my brain told me to go home and demand answers, to have the conversation that would either save our marriage or end it cleanly. But another part of me, the part that had built a successful business from nothing, wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with before I made any moves. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Tony Martinez, a private investigator I'd used occasionally for corporate matters. If David was having an affair, I needed proof. If he was planning to leave me, I needed to know what kind of settlement I might be looking at. And if he was doing anything else, dishonest, I needed to know that too. Tony answered on the second ring. "Rachel, It's been a while. What can I do for you? I need you to look into my husband, I said without preamble. I think he's having an affair, and I need to know everything before I make any decisions. I'm sorry to hear that, Tony said, his voice professional but kind. Can you come in tomorrow? We'll need to discuss exactly what you're looking for and what kind of evidence would be most useful. The next morning, I sat in Tony's modest office in Southeast Portland, signing contracts and authorizing surveillance. I felt like I was betraying David by hiring someone to follow him, but the memory of his intimate phone conversation had hardened something inside me. If he could deceive me, I could certainly gather information to protect myself. How long do you think this will take? I asked as Tony reviewed the paperwork. Depends on how careful they're being, he replied. If they're meeting regularly, I should have something concrete within a week or two. If they're more cautious, it might take longer. 2 weeks later, Tony called me with an update that made my stomach drop. Not only was David having an affair, but he was having it with Natalie Brooks, his executive assistant, the woman I'd met exactly twice at company parties, who couldn't have been more than 26 years old, with her bright smile and eager-to-please attitude. They've been meeting regularly for months, Tony explained over the phone. Lunch dates, evening hotel visits, weekend trips when you've been out of town on business. I've got photos, credit card receipts, hotel registrations, the whole package. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Based on what I can document, at least 8 months, possibly longer. 8 months, while I'd been working 16-hour days to expand my business, while I'd been planning our upcoming anniversary trip, while I'd been considering whether we should start trying for children, David had been building an entire relationship with someone else. There's something else, Tony continued, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice. I did some background checking on both of them, just routine stuff. Rachel, do you know where Natalie Brooks works? David's firm, I replied automatically. She's his executive assistant. Right, but do you know who holds the primary contract? For Callaway and Associates? I felt the blood drain from my face as the realization hit me. My company. Evergreen Marketing Solutions accounts for about 70% of their revenue, Tony confirmed. Your husband's business is essentially dependent on contracts from your company, and his girlfriend is technically your employee through the subcontractor agreement. The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. Almost. That evening, I sat in my living room with Tony's file spread across the coffee table. Photos of David and Natalie holding hands outside restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel receipts from weekends when David had claimed to be at business. Conferences. Text message printouts that made me feel sick to read. But it was the financial information that really caught my attention. David's firm was struggling more than I'd realized. Without the Evergreen contract, they'd be bankrupt within 6 months. Every other client was either paying below market rates or chronically late with payments. My company wasn't just supporting his lifestyle, it was keeping his business afloat. I thought about the conversations we'd had over the years about money, about my success, about his struggles to build his client base. I'd always been supportive, always encouraged him to take his time building something sustainable. I'd never once mentioned that I could simply end his contract and destroy his livelihood because I'd loved him and wanted him to succeed on his own merits. Now, staring at evidence of his betrayal, I realized that David had been taking advantage of my discretion and my love while planning to leave me for someone barely out of college. My phone buzzed with a text message from David. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. I looked at the timestamp on one of Tony's photos. David and Natalie entering the Crowne Plaza downtown at 6:30 p.m., just an hour ago. Instead of crying or throwing things or calling him to scream, I opened my laptop and began to plan. The first thing I did was review the Callaway and Associates contract. As I'd suspected, there was a 30-day termination clause that I could invoke for any reason with written notice. The contract was worth $2.3 million annually to David's firm, and losing it would force him to lay off most of his staff within weeks. But ending the contract immediately felt too easy, too quick. I wanted David and Natalie to understand exactly what they'd lost before I pulled the rug out from under them. The second thing I did was schedule a meeting with Marcus Reed, my business partner and COO. Marcus had been with me since the early days of Evergreen, and I trusted him completely. If I was going to orchestrate David's downfall, I needed someone I could rely on to handle the business side of things. "You look like hell," Marcus said the moment I walked into his office the next morning. "Thanks for the pep talk," I replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I need to tell you something, and I need your help with a delicate situation." I laid out everything: the affair, the private investigator's findings, the fact that we were essentially funding David's infidelity through our business relationship with his firm. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "What do you want to do?" he asked when I finished. "I want justice," I said simply, "but I want it to be poetic." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "What did you have in mind?" "Natalie Brooks doesn't know who I am," I explained. "She's never seen me in a professional context, only as David's wife at a couple of social events. What if we called a meeting with Callaway and Associates to discuss the renewal of their contract? Standard business meeting, nothing unusual." "You want to sit across from her in a conference room and watch her realize who you are. I want to watch both of them realize what they're about to lose." Over the next week, Marcus and I carefully orchestrated what we privately called the revelation. We scheduled a contract review meeting with Callaway and Associates for the following Friday morning. The agenda would include discussing potential changes to the scope of work, budget adjustments, and long-term partnership goals. Standard business. Fair that wouldn't raise any suspicions. David seemed pleased when I mentioned the meeting in passing. "It's great that Evergreen wants to expand the partnership," he said over dinner on Wednesday night, completely oblivious to the irony. Marcus has always been professional to work with. I agreed, cutting my salmon into precise pieces. "I think you'll find the meeting very informative." On Thursday evening, David announced that he'd be working late again. I watched him leave, knowing he was going to spend the evening with Natalie, probably planning their future together. I wondered if they talked about me, if they felt guilty, if they'd convinced themselves that what they were doing was justified, somehow. It didn't matter. In less than 18 hours, their world would come crashing down. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Portland weather that matched my mood perfectly. I dressed carefully in my best business suit, a charcoal gray Armani that made me feel powerful and untouchable. I applied my makeup with precision, choosing a bold red lipstick that reminded me of war paint. Amanda Foster, my best friend since college, called just as I was leaving the house. "Today's the day?" she asked without preamble. "Today's the day," I confirmed, checking my reflection one last time in the hallway mirror. "I still think you should have confronted them privately first," Amanda said, but I could hear the excitement in her voice. She'd been furious on my behalf, ever since I'd told her about the affair. "Where's the fun in that?" I replied, grabbing my keys. "Besides, they've had 8 months to come clean. I think public humiliation is exactly what they deserve." The Evergreen Marketing Solutions offices occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek downtown building with panoramic views of the Willamette River. I'd chosen the location specifically because it projected success and stability, qualities that had helped us land major clients over the years. Marcus was waiting for me when I arrived, 2 cups of coffee in hand and a folder thick with contract documents under his arm. "Ready to end some careers?" he asked with a grin that didn't quite hide his anger on my behalf. "I've been ready, for weeks," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Is the conference room set up?" "Camera system is recording, James Harrison from legal is standing by, and I've got the termination paperwork ready to go." All we need now is for them to show up. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At exactly 10 a.m., our receptionist called to announce that David Calloway and his team had arrived. I took a deep breath, smoothed my skirt, and walked toward the conference room with the confidence of someone who held all the cards. David was already seated at the large mahogany table, wearing his best suit and the smile he reserved for important business meetings. Beside him sat Natalie Brooks, looking professional and polished in a navy blue dress that probably cost more than she could afford on an assistant's salary. She had a legal pad in front of her and was holding a pen with the eager attention of someone trying to make a good impression. Neither of them looked up when I entered the room. "Good morning, David," Marcus said smoothly, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Thank you for coming in today. I think this is going to be a very productive meeting." "Always happy to work with Evergreen," David replied, his charm on full display. "You know how much I value our partnership." "Actually," Marcus continued, glancing at me with barely concealed amusement, "I'd like to introduce you to someone who's been very interested in discussing your contract renewal. David Calloway, Natalie Brooks. I'd like you to meet the CEO of Evergreen Marketing Solutions, Rachel Winters." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. David's face went through a series of transformations: confusion, recognition, and finally, absolute horror. The color drained from his cheeks so quickly I thought he might faint. Natalie looked between David and me, her eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "I'm sorry," she said slowly, "but didn't you say your name was Rachel Winters? Because David's wife is named Rachel, and—" Her voice trailed off as the pieces began clicking into place. "Hello, Natalie," I said calmly, settling into my chair with the grace of someone who owned the building. "It's nice to finally meet you in a professional capacity. I believe you've been handling the administrative side of our contract for several months now." Natalie's pen slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table. Her eyes darted between David and me, and I could practically see her mental calculations. David's wife equals Rachel Winters, equals CEO of Evergreen, equals her actual boss, equals the person who signs her paychecks. "Oh my God," she whispered, her face flushing bright red. David found his voice first. "Rachel, what are you doing here? What is this?" "This," I replied, opening the folder in front of me with deliberate precision, "is a contract review meeting. Isn't that what we scheduled, Marcus?" "That's exactly what we scheduled," Marcus confirmed, his tone businesslike despite the chaos unfolding at the table. "We have some concerns about the Calloway and Associates account that we need to address." I pulled out the first document, a summary of Tony's investigation complete with photos and receipts. I placed it on the table where both David and Natalie could see it clearly. "Our first concern," I continued in the same calm tone I used for all business meetings, "is the conflict of interest that's developed between your firm and ours. It seems one of your employees has been engaging in personal activities that compromise the professional relationship between our companies." Natalie made a small choking sound and pressed her hand to her mouth. David stared at the photos spread across the table, his face cycling through expressions of panic and desperation. "Rachel, please," he started. But I held up my hand to stop him. "I'm not finished," I said firmly. "Our second concern is the financial dependency your firm has developed on our contract. 70% of your revenue comes from Evergreen Marketing Solutions, which puts both companies in a precarious position." I pulled out the second set of documents, financial reports that laid bare just how close to bankruptcy David's firm really was. "And our third concern," I continued, watching Natalie's face grow paler with each word, "is the question of professional conduct and whether we can continue to trust Calloway and Associates to handle our projects with the discretion and integrity we require." Marcus leaned forward, playing his part perfectly. What Rachel is saying, David, is that we've discovered your affair with your assistant. We know your business is completely dependent on our contract, and we're questioning whether we want to continue this partnership. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Natalie's rapid breathing. She looked like she was about to hyperventilate. "How long have you known?" David asked quietly, his business persona completely shattered. "Long enough," I replied. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" I let that question hang in the air for a moment, savoring the look of absolute terror on both their faces. They were finally beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. "I have a proposal," I said finally, pulling out the last set of documents. "A separation agreement that I think you'll find very interesting." But before I could explain what I meant, Natalie Brooks burst into tears and ran from the room, leaving her purse and legal pad behind. Through the conference room windows, I watched her stumble toward the elevators, her professional composure completely destroyed. David started to follow her, but I stopped him with a single word. "Sit." He sat. David stared at me across the mahogany conference table, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the armrests of his chair. The confident businessman who had walked into this meeting 30 minutes ago had completely vanished, replaced by a man who looked like he'd aged 5 years in the span of our conversation. "Rachel, I can explain," he began, his voice hoarse, with desperation. "Can you?" I interrupted, my tone as sharp as broken glass. "Can you explain why you've been lying to me for 8 months? Can you explain why you've been using my company's money to fund your affair? Can you explain why you thought you could betray me and keep benefiting from my success?" Marcus cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should focus on the business implications first," he suggested, though I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. He was enjoying this almost as much as I was. I opened my laptop and pulled up a presentation I'd spent the previous evening preparing. The first slide displayed the Callaway & Associates financial overview in stark black and white numbers. "Let's talk about your situation, David," I said, clicking to the next slide. "Your firm currently employs 12 people. Your monthly operating expenses are approximately $180,000. Your current cash flow, excluding the evergreen contract, is negative $47,000 per month. Without our business, you'll be bankrupt within 16 weeks. David's face had gone completely white. He'd always been vague about his company's finances, claiming business was good whenever I asked. Now he was seeing his own numbers presented, with the clinical precision of a corporate audit. "You've been struggling for over 2 years, I continued, advancing to the next slide. "The Henderson Group canceled their contract in January of last year. Morrison Industries reduced their monthly retainer by 60% last summer. The only reason your business is still afloat is because my company has been consistently paying above market rates for your services." "Rachel, please," David whispered. But I wasn't finished. "Above market rates that I personally approved," I added, letting that fact sink in. "Every month for the past 3 years, I've been signing off on payments to your firm. Every month, I've been ensuring that you had enough money to maintain our lifestyle, to take me on expensive vacations, to buy me jewelry for our anniversaries. Money that you've apparently been using to wine and dine Natalie Brooks." Marcus pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. "These are the receipts our investigator collected," he explained. "Dinner at Le Bernardin on March 15th, charged to the Callaway & Associates corporate card. The same night Rachel was in Seattle closing the Morrison deal that brought in $300,000 for your company." I felt a surge of anger as I remembered that night. I'd called David from my hotel room, exhausted but excited to share the good news about landing Morrison as a client. He'd seemed distracted during our conversation, claiming he was tired from a long day at the office. Now I knew he'd been at an expensive French restaurant with his 26-year-old girlfriend, probably toasting their affair with champagne I'd essentially paid for. "Hotel room at the Westin on April 3rd, Marcus continued, flipping through the documentation. Spa weekend in Napa Valley on April 20th through 22nd. The weekend you told Rachel you were attending that business conference in Sacramento. Each receipt felt like a fresh betrayal. I'd encouraged David to attend that conference, thinking it would be good for his professional development. I'd even offered to pay for his registration fees. "Stop," David said suddenly, his voice cracking. "Just stop. I know what I did. I know how it looks." "How it looks?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to maintain professional composure. "David, this isn't about appearances. This is about the fact that you've been systematically deceiving me while using my success to subsidize your betrayal." The conference room door opened, and James Harrison, our chief legal counsel, entered with a briefcase and a grim expression. I'd asked him to prepare for this meeting without explaining exactly what we'd be discussing, but James was smart enough to read the room. "Mrs. Winters," he said formally, taking a seat beside Marcus, "I have the documents you requested." David's eyes darted between the three of us, and I could see him beginning to understand that this wasn't just a confrontation. This was a carefully orchestrated business meeting with legal implications. "James," I said, "could you please explain to Mr. Calloway the terms of the contract termination clause in our agreement with his firm?" James opened his briefcase and pulled out a copy of the Calloway and Associates contract. Section 12(3) allows for immediate termination with 30 days written notice for any reason deemed detrimental to Evergreen Marketing Solutions' business interests or reputation. "And what constitutes detrimental to business interests?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Conflicts of interest, unprofessional conduct, breach of confidentiality, or any behavior that could reflect poorly on Evergreen's judgment in selecting business partners," James recited. David was gripping the table so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "Rachel, you can't be serious. Ending our contract would destroy my business. It would put 12 people out of work." 12 people who are currently employed because I've chosen to keep your firm afloat despite your incompetence, I replied coldly. 12 people whose livelihoods you've endangered by conducting an affair with your assistant, instead of focusing on building a sustainable business. Marcus leaned forward, his expression sympathetic but firm. "David, let's be realistic here. Your company has been hemorrhaging money for years. The only reason you haven't gone bankrupt is because Rachel has been subsidizing you through inflated contract payments. She's essentially been your silent business partner without knowing it." "That's not true," David protested weakly. "Isn't it?" I challenged. "When was the last time you brought in a new client without my help? When was the last time you delivered a project that exceeded expectations? When was the last time you contributed anything to this partnership besides taking advantage of my generosity?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, each one landing with devastating accuracy. David had always been charming and ambitious, but he'd never been particularly talented at business development or client management. I'd attributed his struggles to the competitive nature of the consulting market, never realizing that I was essentially keeping his company afloat through our contract. "Where is Natalie now?" I asked suddenly. David glanced toward the door. "She's probably in the lobby. This has been a shock for her too." "A shock?" I laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "David, she's been sleeping with her ultimate boss's husband for 8 months. If she didn't realize this could happen, she's even more naive than I thought." Marcus stood up and walked to the windows overlooking the city. "I have to ask, David, what was your endgame here? Did you think you could continue the affair indefinitely? Did you plan to leave Rachel but somehow keep the Evergreen contract?" David was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I was going to ask for a divorce after our anniversary next month. I hoped we could keep things professional, for the sake of the business." The audacity of his statement hit me like a physical blow. He'd planned to leave me for his secretary but expected me to continue funding his lifestyle and his business. He'd thought he could have his cake and eat it too, maintaining our financial relationship while ending our personal one. "You thought I would continue paying you after you left me for another woman?" I asked incredulously. "The contract is between our companies," David said desperately. "I thought we could separate our personal and professional relationships." "The contract is between your company and mine," I corrected. "A contract that I personally negotiate, approve, and oversee. Did you really think I would continue working with you after you destroyed our marriage?" James cleared his throat. "If I may," he interjected, "there's another legal issue we need to address. Mrs. Brooks is technically an employee of Callaway and Associates, but since that firm operates under contract with Evergreen, she's subject to our code of conduct policies." "What does that mean?" David asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. "It means that engaging in behavior that creates conflicts of interest or damages the professional relationship between our companies is grounds for immediate termination," James explained. "Mrs. Brooks has violated multiple provisions of our contractor conduct agreement." I felt a surge of satisfaction. Natalie Brooks wasn't just losing her boyfriend's husband. She was losing her job, her income, and her professional reputation in one devastating blow. "There's something else," I said, pulling out my phone. "Tony Martinez, our private investigator, discovered some interesting patterns in your expense reports over the past year." I opened the photos Tony had sent me the night before. "These are credit card statements from the Callaway and Associates corporate account. Restaurants, hotels, gifts, travel expenses, all charged to business entertainment, all coinciding with your dates with Natalie." David's face went from white to green. "Rachel, I can reimburse the company for any personal expenses." "With what money?" Marcus asked pointedly. "Your company's checking account has a balance of $23,000. These expenses total more than $15,000 over the past 6 months alone." "That's embezzlement," James said matter-of-factly. "Using corporate funds for personal expenses without board approval or reimbursement constitutes theft." "Board approval?" David sputtered. "I own the company." "You own a company that's operated at a loss for 2 years," I corrected. "A company that exists solely because of the revenue from my contract. A company that's apparently been used as a personal slush fund for your affair." The room fell silent as the full scope of David's situation became clear. He wasn't just losing his wife and his marriage. He was facing potential criminal charges, the collapse of his business, and complete financial ruin. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice defeated. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment I'd been anticipating for weeks. "I want you to understand exactly what you've thrown away," I said. "I want you to realize that while you were sneaking around with a girl barely out of college, you were betraying the person who made your entire lifestyle possible." "And then?" David asked. "And then I want you to live with the consequences of your choices." I stood up and walked to the windows where Marcus had been standing. The city spread out below us, a testament to the success I'd built through hard work, intelligence, and integrity. Success that David had taken for granted while planning to leave me for someone else. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, turning back to face him. "The Evergreen contract with Callaway and Associates will be terminated effective immediately. James will file the necessary paperwork this afternoon." "Rachel, please," David started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. Natalie Brooks will be terminated from your firm today for violation of our contractor conduct policies. Any future business relationship between her and Evergreen Marketing Solutions is permanently prohibited." David's shoulders sagged as he realized the full implications. Losing Natalie wouldn't just cost him his girlfriend. It would cost him his most competent employee. "Furthermore," I continued, "James will be conducting a full audit of your corporate expenses over the past 2 years. Any personal charges will need to be reimbursed within 30 days or will be forced to pursue legal action." "I don't have that kind of money," David admitted. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to fund your affair with corporate credit cards, Marcus said unsympathetically. I returned to my seat and opened my briefcase, pulling out a set of documents I'd had prepared the night before. These are divorce papers, I announced. I'm filing for dissolution of marriage on grounds of adultery and financial misconduct. David stared at the papers as if they were a death sentence. Financial misconduct? Using marital assets to fund an extramarital affair constitutes financial misconduct in Oregon, James explained. Rachel has grounds to seek full recovery of any money spent on your relationship with Mrs. Brooks. Including the corporate expenses, I added. Since your company's revenue comes primarily from my business, any money you spent on Natalie essentially came from my pocket. The mathematics of his betrayal were becoming clear to David. Not only had he lost his wife and his business, but he was facing potential financial liability that could follow him for years. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out the final document. This is a non-disclosure agreement. You and Natalie will agree not to discuss the details of our business relationship or the circumstances of the contract termination with anyone, outside of your immediate legal counsel. Why? David asked. Because I don't want your poor judgment reflecting on my company's reputation, I replied. Evergreen Marketing Solutions has worked too hard to build our professional standing. To have it damaged by association with your personal failures. Marcus sat back down and folded his hands on the table. David, I think you need to understand something. Rachel could have handled this very differently. She could have had you arrested for embezzlement. She could have sued you for breach of fiduciary duty. She could have made sure you never worked in this industry again. Instead, I said, I'm giving you the opportunity to shut down your business with some dignity intact, find new employment, and start over somewhere else. But only if you sign these agreements and disappear from my life permanently. David looked at the stack of papers in front of him, then at me, then at Marcus and James. The weight of his situation was finally sinking in. He'd gambled everything on a relationship with his secretary, and he'd lost everything that mattered. What about Natalie? He asked quietly. What about her? I replied. She's an adult who made her own choices. She chose to have an affair with a married man. She chose to jeopardize her employment. She chose to risk her professional reputation for a relationship with someone old enough to be her father. Those were her decisions, and now she gets to live with the consequences. She didn't know, David said weakly. She didn't know what? That you were married? That I existed? That actions have consequences? I shook my head in disgust. David, she worked as your assistant. She scheduled your meetings, managed your calendar, answered your phone calls. She knew exactly what she was doing. Through the conference room windows, I could see the parking garage where David's BMW was parked. The same BMW I'd helped him buy 2 years ago when his business was struggling. The same BMW he'd driven to meet Natalie at hotels and restaurants across the city. You have 24 hours to decide, I said, gathering my papers. Sign the agreements, close your business, and disappear quietly, or face the legal and financial consequences of what you've done. David nodded slowly, his fight completely gone. Can I ask you something? What? Did you ever really love me, or was this all just business to you? The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, the professional mask I'd been wearing slipped. I thought about the early days of our relationship, when David had been charming and ambitious and full of dreams. I thought about our wedding day, when I'd believed we were building a life together. I thought about all the nights I'd worked late, believing I was securing our future, while he was building a relationship with someone else. I loved the man I thought you were, I said finally. But that man was apparently just as much of an illusion as our marriage. David flinched as if I'd slapped him, but he didn't argue. How could he? Everything I'd said was true. Marcus stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. David, you should probably go check on Natalie. I imagine she's having a difficult... Day? She's having a difficult day? I repeated incredulously. She just discovered that she's been sleeping with her boss's husband. A boss who now knows exactly who she is and what she's been doing. A boss who has the power to make sure she never works in marketing again. I'd say she's having more than just a difficult day. As David gathered his things and prepared to leave, he paused at the door. For what it's worth, Rachel, I am sorry. I never meant for things to happen this way. No, I replied. You just never meant to get caught. After David left, the three of us sat in silence for several minutes. The conference room felt different now, as if the confrontation had changed the very air inside it. Well, Marcus said finally, that was exactly as satisfying as I hoped it would be. James was already organizing his paperwork. I'll have the contract termination filed by close of business today. The audit request will go out first thing Monday morning. And the divorce papers? I asked. I'll file them tomorrow. Given the evidence of adultery and financial misconduct, you should be able to get a very favorable settlement. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The confrontation I'd been planning for weeks was finally over, but the real work was just beginning. I had a business to run, a life to rebuild, and a future to plan without David in it. There is one more thing we need to discuss, Marcus said carefully. The Callaway and Associates account was worth $3 million annually. We're going to need to redistribute that work to other contractors. Already handled, I replied. I've been reaching out to other consulting firms all week. Davidson and Partners can take over the Morrison account, and Sterling Consultants has agreed to handle the Henderson Group projects. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You've been planning this for longer than I thought. I've been planning this since the day I found out about the affair, I admitted. I knew that once I confronted David, there would be no going back. I wanted to make sure Evergreen didn't suffer because of my personal problems. And what about you? James asked. How are you holding up? I considered the question carefully. How was I holding up? I'd just destroyed my husband's business, ended my marriage, and orchestrated one of the most professionally devastating confrontations of my career. I should have felt guilty, or sad, or at least conflicted about what I'd done. Instead, I felt free. I'm better than I've been in months, I said honestly. For the first time in 8 months, I know exactly where I stand. No more lies, no more wondering why David seemed distant, no more making excuses for his behavior. Just the truth, finally. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Amanda Foster. How did it go? Do I need to bring wine or champagne? I smiled as I typed back, bring champagne, and maybe some tissues for David. The reply came immediately. I knew you had this handled. See you at 7. As we prepared to leave the conference room, Marcus asked the question I'd been dreading. What are you going to do now? Now, I said, looking out at the city that had become my professional kingdom, I'm going to do what I should have done years ago. I'm going to focus on building something that's entirely mine, something that can't be threatened or undermined by anyone else's poor choices. Meaning Evergreen Marketing Solutions is about to get a lot bigger. The champagne Amanda brought that evening was Dom Perignon, the same brand David and I had served at our wedding reception 8 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on either of us as we sat in my living room, toasting the end of my marriage with the same wine that had celebrated its beginning. Tell me everything, Amanda demanded, settling into the leather armchair that David would never sit in again. I want every detail, every facial expression, every moment of panic. I recounted the entire meeting while Amanda's expressions shifted from satisfaction to outright glee. She'd been my college roommate, my maid of honor, and the only person who'd ever dared to suggest that David might not be worthy of me. Today had vindicated years of her politely restrained skepticism. The part where Natalie realized you were her boss, Amanda said, shaking her head in amazement. I wish I could have seen her face. 26 years old, and she just destroyed her career for a man who was using her to get back at his wife. She wasn't trying to get back at me, I corrected. That would have required David to think of me as worthy of revenge. No, this was just selfishness and stupidity. Amanda raised her glass. To David's stupidity and your brilliant revenge. It wasn't revenge, I said, though I clinked my glass against hers. It was justice. There's a difference. Enlighten me. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked our backyard, where the garden I'd spent years cultivating was blooming with late spring flowers. David had never shown any interest in gardening, claiming he didn't have time for hobbies. Now I realized he'd been too busy with other pursuits to care about the life we were supposedly building together. Revenge would have been destroying him because I was angry, I explained. Justice is letting him experience the natural consequences of his choices. He chose to betray me. He chose to embezzle company funds. He chose to jeopardize his employees' livelihoods for an affair. I just made sure those choices had appropriate consequences. Semantics, Amanda said with a wave of her hand. Either way, he got what he deserved. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from David's personal account, sent an hour ago. The subject line read, "I signed the papers." He signed, I announced, opening the message. Amanda leaned forward, eagerly. What does he say? The email was brief and formal, nothing like the intimate messages David used to send me during our early relationship. Rachel, I've signed all the documents James prepared. My attorney reviewed everything and advised me to accept your terms. Callaway and Associates will officially close next Friday. I've already started making arrangements to relocate to Denver, where my cousin has offered me a position with his firm. I know this doesn't change anything, but I want you to know that I never intended for things to end this way. I hope someday you can forgive me. David. Denver, Amanda mused. Running away to start over. How predictable. It's better for everyone if he leaves Portland, I said, though part of me felt a strange sadness reading his message. Despite everything he'd done, David had been part of my life for nearly a decade. His absence would leave a void, even if it was a necessary one. What about Natalie? I opened my laptop and pulled up the termination letter James had sent to Callaway and Associates that afternoon. Effective immediately. Terminated for violation of contractor conduct policies. She's been escorted from the building and her access to all Evergreen-related projects has been revoked. Do you think she knew about you being the CEO? I'd been wondering the same thing all day. Had Natalie Brooks been aware that she was sleeping with her ultimate boss's husband? Or had she been as clueless as David claimed? The answer mattered. Less than the outcome, but I was curious about her motivations. I don't think she knew, I admitted. David always kept our professional lives separate. He probably told her I worked in marketing but never specified that I owned the company paying his bills. That makes it worse somehow, Amanda said. She was willing to have an affair with a married man without even understanding the full scope of what she was risking. The house felt different that evening, larger and quieter without David's presence. I'd asked him to move out immediately after signing the divorce papers, and he'd complied without argument. Most of his clothes were already gone, along with his toiletries, his books, and the expensive Scotch collection he'd been building for years. What remained were the artifacts of our shared life. Wedding photos I would need to remove, furniture we'd chosen together, artwork we'd purchased during happier times. The process of disentangling 8 years of marriage would take months, but the emotional work had been completed the moment I discovered his betrayal. Are you going to stay in the house? Amanda asked, following my gaze around the living room. For now, I replied. Eventually I might sell it and buy something that's entirely mine, but there's no rush. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. The caller ID showed Marcus Reed, which was unusual for a Friday evening. Marcus? Is everything all right? Rachel, I'm sorry to bother you at home, but I thought you should know. David Calloway just called the office. He wants to schedule a meeting for Monday morning. I frowned. We terminated his contract today. What could he possibly want to, discuss? He claims he has a business proposal that could benefit both companies. Something about a consulting arrangement that wouldn't conflict with the divorce proceedings. Amanda was watching my face carefully, clearly picking up on the tension in my voice. Did you tell him that was impossible? I asked Marcus. I told him I'd pass along his message and let you decide whether to respond. But Rachel, there's something else. He mentioned that Natalie Brooks wants to meet with you personally. Absolutely not. That's what I figured you'd say. But she's apparently been calling the office all afternoon, insisting that there's been a misunderstanding and that she needs to explain her side of the story. I felt a surge of anger. Even after everything that had happened, Natalie Brooks still thought she could manipulate the situation to her advantage. The audacity was breathtaking. Marcus, please make sure our security team knows that neither David Calloway nor Natalie Brooks are welcome in our building. If either of them shows up, they should be escorted off the premises immediately. Already handled, Marcus assured me. I just wanted to keep you informed. After I hung up, Amanda was staring at me with raised eyebrows. Let me guess, she said. They're not going quietly. Apparently not. I spent the weekend in a strange state of limbo, catching up on work I'd neglected while planning David's downfall and trying to adjust to the silence of an empty house. The dogs seemed confused by David's absence, wandering from room to room as if searching for their missing human. I found myself talking to them more than usual, filling the quiet spaces with explanations they couldn't understand. He made his choice, Max, I told our golden retriever as he sat by the front door Saturday morning, clearly waiting for David to come home from his morning run. He chose someone else, and now we have to figure out how to be happy without him. Max tilted, his head at me with the patient expression dogs use when humoring their humans' emotional needs. Sunday evening brought an unexpected visitor. I was reading in the living room when the doorbell rang, followed immediately by aggressive knocking. Through the peephole, I could see a young woman with blonde hair and a determined expression that I recognized from the photos in Tony's investigative file. Natalie Brooks was standing on my front porch. I considered ignoring her, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door but didn't invite her in, keeping the security chain latched. Mrs. Calloway, she began, then corrected herself. I mean, Mrs. Winters, I need to talk to you. We have nothing to discuss, I replied coolly. Please, just 5 minutes. I know you think you understand what happened, but there are things you don't know. Things David never told you. Despite my better judgment, I found myself studying her face. Up close, Natalie Brooks was prettier than her photos suggested, with the kind of youth and freshness that men like David found irresistible. But there was something else in her expression, a desperation that made me curious about what she thought she could possibly say to change my mind. You have 3 minutes, I said, unchaining the door and stepping back to let her in. Natalie entered hesitantly, her eyes taking in the expensive furnishings and artwork that decorated our foyer. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, a far cry from the professional attire she'd worn to our meeting on Friday. Thank you, she said, following me into the living room. I know this is awkward, but I had to try to explain. Explain what? How you've been sleeping with my husband for 8 months. Natalie flinched at my directness. It's not what you think. I mean, yes, we've been seeing each other, but David told me you two were already separated. He said you were just staying, married for business reasons, and that you both had other relationships. I stared at her, genuinely surprised by the elaborate nature of David's deception. He hadn't just hidden our marriage from her. He'd invented an entirely fictional version of our relationship. He told you we were separated? He said you lived separate lives, that you hadn't been intimate in over a year, That you were only maintaining the marriage because divorce would complicate your business arrangements. Natalie's voice was gaining confidence as she spoke, as if she'd rehearsed this explanation. He said you both were seeing other people and that you had an understanding. The sophistication of David's lies was almost impressive. He'd managed to conduct his affair while convincing Natalie that she wasn't actually the other woman, that their relationship was perfectly legitimate given the circumstances he'd described. And you believed him? Why wouldn't I? He showed me the guest bedroom where he said he slept. He explained why you never attended company events together, why you kept separate social circles. Everything he told me made sense. I had to admit that David's story was cleverly constructed. He'd taken real elements of our marriage, the fact that we often traveled separately for work, that I preferred to keep my business life private, that we maintained some independence within our relationship, and twisted them into evidence of a loveless arrangement. Natalie, I said slowly, David and I shared a bedroom until the day I discovered your affair. We attended charity events together last month. We were planning a vacation to Italy for our anniversary next month. We were not separated, we were not leading separate lives, and we certainly didn't have an understanding about other relationships. The color drained from Natalie's face as she realized the full scope of David's deception. She wasn't just the other woman. She was the other woman who'd been manipulated into believing she wasn't the other woman. But, he said, she began, then stopped, the futility of her argument becoming clear. He lied to you, I said, almost feeling sorry for her. He lied to you the same way he lied to me. The only difference is that I was married to him, so I had more to lose. Natalie sat down heavily in the armchair Amanda had occupied the night, before her composure finally cracking. I lost my job. I lost my apartment. I lost everything. You lost your job because you violated company policy by having an affair with a contractor. You lost your apartment because you can no longer afford it without the income you forfeited by having that affair. You lost everything because you made poor choices, not because I'm vindictive. But if I had known the truth about your marriage, would it have mattered? I interrupted. Would you have turned down a relationship with your boss if you'd known he was lying about his wife instead of lying about his separation? Natalie was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. I don't know. I think you do know, I said gently. I think you knew David was married and you convinced yourself that it didn't matter because he made you feel special and important. I think you knew there were risks involved and you decided they were worth taking. The only thing you didn't know was that I had the power to make those risks into reality. What am I supposed to do now? Natalie asked, tears finally beginning to fall. I can't get another job in marketing in this city. Everyone knows what happened. You're 26 years old, I pointed out. You have your whole life ahead of you. You can move to another city, change careers, start over. People recover from mistakes like this all the time. David said he was going to leave you for me. He said we were going to get married and travel and build a life together. The naivety in her voice reminded me why David had found her so appealing. Natalie Brooks had believed everything he told her because she'd wanted to believe it, because it fit the romantic narrative she'd constructed around their relationship. David says a lot of things, I replied. Most of them are lies designed to get him what he wants. You're not the first woman he's charmed with promises he had no intention of keeping. Natalie looked up at me sharply. There were others? I realized I'd said more than I intended, but there was no point in protecting David's reputation now. There was a woman named Jennifer at his previous job. I found some messages between them a few years ago, but David convinced me it was just harmless flirtation. Then there was his trainer at the gym, Sarah. They had coffee a few times before I suggested he find a different trainer. He cheated on you before? He flirted with other women regularly, I clarified. You were just the first one stupid enough to take him seriously. The insult hit its mark, and Natalie's expression hardened. You don't have to be cruel. I'm not being cruel. I'm being honest. David is a charming, manipulative man who takes advantage of women who are impressed by his success and his attention. You fell for his act because you wanted to believe you were special enough to make him leave his wife. But you weren't special, Natalie. You were just convenient. Natalie stood up abruptly, her brief moment of vulnerability replaced by anger. You act like you're so perfect. But maybe David cheated because you're a cold, calculating bitch who cares more about your business than your husband. I'd been waiting for this accusation, the inevitable moment when Natalie would try to make David's betrayal my fault somehow. Maybe, I agreed calmly. Or maybe David cheated because he's a selfish man who wanted to have his cake and eat it, too. Maybe he thought he could keep the financial security of being married to a successful woman while enjoying the ego boost of sleeping with someone young enough to be impressed by his mediocre accomplishments. His accomplishments aren't mediocre, Natalie protested, revealing how little she understood about David's professional failures. His business was failing before I started subsidizing it with our contract, I explained patiently. David hasn't brought in a significant new client in over 2 years. The only reason Callaway and Associates survived as long as it did was because I was essentially funding it through inflated payments for substandard work. That's not true. David is brilliant at what he does. David is mediocre at what he does, but he's excellent at making people believe he's more successful than he actually is. It's the same skill he used to convince you that your affair was somehow legitimate. Natalie was quiet for several minutes, processing the full scope of how thoroughly she'd been deceived. When she finally spoke, her voice was defeated. What happens now? Now you learn from this experience and make better choices in the future, I said. You find a new job in a new city where nobody knows about your affair with a married man. You rebuild your career and your reputation. You grow up. And David? David faces the consequences of his actions. His business is closing, his marriage is over, and his reputation in this industry is destroyed. He'll start over in Denver and hopefully learn something from this experience, though I'm not particularly optimistic about his capacity for personal growth. Natalie gathered her purse and moved toward the door, her brief confrontation having accomplished nothing except confirming my assessment of her character. For what it's worth, she said as I walked her to the foyer. I am sorry. I never wanted to hurt anyone. But you did hurt someone, I replied. You hurt me, you hurt yourself, and you hurt every woman who comes after you, because you taught David that his lies and manipulation work. The next time he wants to cheat on his wife, he'll remember how easy it was to convince you that adultery was acceptable. After Natalie left, I poured myself another glass of wine and sat in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The confrontation had been more satisfying than I'd expected, not because I'd destroyed her illusions about David, but because I'd finally understood the full scope of his deception. David hadn't just betrayed me. He'd manipulated a young woman into participating in that betrayal by lying about the nature of our marriage. He'd used both of us to get what he wanted, and he'd probably convinced himself that his elaborate deceptions were somehow justified. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was brief. Thank you for opening my eyes. I'm moving back to Phoenix next week. I hope you find happiness. It was from Natalie, and despite everything that had happened, I found myself hoping she would indeed learn from this experience and make better choices in the future. Monday morning brought a return to normalcy, or at least the new version of normalcy that my life would become. I arrived at the office early and found Marcus already at his desk, reviewing the contracts for the new consulting firms that would be taking over David's former projects. Everything's in place, he reported. Davidson and Partners starts on the Morrison account today, and Sterling Consultants will begin the Henderson Group transition next week. We shouldn't miss a beat. Good. Any word from David? He called again this morning, still insisting he has a business proposal worth considering. I told him to put it in writing and send it through his attorney. I shook my head in amazement. Even after losing everything, David was still trying to find an angle, still believing he could charm his way back into my good graces for the sake of business. Ignore any further contact from him, I instructed. And Marcus, I want to schedule a company meeting for later this week. It's time to announce some changes. What kind of changes? I smiled, feeling more energized about my business than I had in years. The kind that turn a marketing company into a marketing empire. The meeting I'd been planning since David's betrayal was about to become reality. Evergreen Marketing Solutions was going to expand aggressively, and I was going to make sure that nobody would ever again be in a position to threaten what I'd built. 6 months after David signed the divorce papers, I stood in the penthouse conference room of our new headquarters in downtown Seattle, looking out at the Puget Sound while my team prepared for the biggest presentation in Evergreen Marketing Solutions history. The expansion I'd planned during those dark weeks of discovering David's betrayal had exceeded even my most optimistic projections. The Microsoft team just arrived, Marcus announced, entering the room with a stack of presentation folders. Sarah? Chen from Amazon is running 10 minutes late, but her assistant confirmed she'll be here. I smoothed my charcoal suit jacket and checked my reflection in the conference room windows. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the naive wife who'd trusted her husband blindly just 7 months ago. This woman was sharper, more focused, and completely in control of her destiny. Any word from the Portland office? About the Nike contract? I asked. Confirmed this morning. Amanda's team landed it. 3-year deal worth $8 million annually. Amanda Foster had surprised everyone, including herself, by accepting my offer to head Evergreen's new Portland creative division. Her background in art history and her natural business instincts had made her the perfect candidate to oversee our expansion into luxury brand marketing. And the Los Angeles office? Grand opening is scheduled for next month. Jennifer Morrison has already signed 2 major entertainment clients, and she's in talks with 3 more. Jennifer Morrison was a marketing executive I'd poached from a rival firm, offering her the chance to build something from the ground up in exchange for her expertise in entertainment marketing. The gamble had paid off spectacularly, with our LA division already profitable before officially opening. The conference room door opened, and my assistant announced the arrival of our potential clients. This meeting represented the culmination of 6 months of aggressive expansion, strategic hiring, and careful relationship building. If everything went according to plan, Evergreen Marketing Solutions would secure contracts worth over $15 million annually from this single presentation. Ms. Winters, said Margaret Foster, Microsoft's chief marketing officer, extending her hand with a warm smile. Thank you for making the trip to Seattle. We're excited to hear what Evergreen can offer. The pleasure is mine, I replied, gesturing toward the presentation setup Marcus had arranged. I think you'll find our approach to integrated marketing campaigns exactly what Microsoft needs for the next phase of growth. As the other executives filed in Amazon, Starbucks, Boeing, and Nordstrom, I felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with achievement. These companies weren't interested in meeting with me because of my personal drama or my ability to orchestrate corporate takedowns. They wanted to work with Evergreen because we'd become the most innovative marketing firm on the West Coast. Before we begin, I announced to the assembled group, I want to thank you all for considering Evergreen for your marketing needs. 6 months ago, this company was successful but limited in scope. Today, we're positioned to become the dominant marketing force from Los Angeles to Vancouver, and it's partnerships like the ones we're discussing today that will make that vision a reality. The presentation went flawlessly. Marcus handled the technical aspects of our new digital integration platform, while I focused on the strategic vision that would tie together campaigns across multiple markets and demographics. By the time we reached the Q&A portion, I could see the interest in every face around the table. Ms. Winters, asked David Kim from Starbucks, Your expansion has been remarkably rapid. How do we know Evergreen can maintain quality while growing at this pace? It was a fair question, and one I'd anticipated. Excellent question, David. Our growth strategy has been deliberately methodical. Rather than simply opening offices and hoping for the best, we've identified the top talent in each market and built teams around proven performers. Every new hire has either worked with our existing team members previously or comes with recommendations from clients we trust. What about management continuity? Asked Sarah Chen, who had arrived halfway through the presentation but seemed fully engaged despite missing the introduction. Marcus Reed and I have worked together for 8 years, I replied. Amanda Foster, who heads our Portland creative division, has been my closest friend and informal advisor for over a decade. Jennifer Morrison in Los Angeles comes to us from Warner Brothers, where she spent 5 years building their digital marketing department. We're not just hiring employees. We're building a family of professionals who share our commitment to innovation and results. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, each one more encouraging than the last. These executives weren't trying to find reasons to reject our proposal. They were looking for confirmation that Evergreen could deliver on our ambitious promises. After the clients left, Marcus and I sat alone in the conference room, sharing a bottle of champagne and watching the Seattle skyline light up as evening fell. So, Marcus said, refilling our glasses, care to make any predictions about how many contracts we just landed? All of them, I replied without hesitation. Microsoft was sold before we finished the digital integration demo. Amazon loved the cross-platform approach. Starbucks practically started planning their next campaign while we were talking. Boeing and Nordstrom were taking notes the entire time. And if you're right, that makes Evergreen a $25 million company by the end of the year. I raised my glass, thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. To David Calloway, I said, surprising Marcus with the unexpected toast. To David? To David, whose betrayal forced me to stop playing it safe and start playing to win. If he hadn't cheated on me, I never would have had the motivation to expand this aggressively. I'd probably still be running a comfortable regional firm instead of building a marketing empire. Marcus clinked his glass against mine. In that case, to David's stupidity and our success. The flight back to Portland gave me time to reflect on how dramatically my life had changed. 7 months ago, I'd been a successful but complacent business owner, content to maintain steady growth while supporting my husband's struggling firm. Today, I was the CEO of a rapidly expanding company with offices in 3 major cities and contracts with some of the most prestigious brands in the country. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, with David agreeing to a settlement that left him with minimal assets and no claim to Evergreen or its subsidiaries. He'd relocated to Denver as planned, where his cousin had indeed offered him a position with a mid-sized consulting firm. According to the mutual acquaintances who occasionally updated me on his situation, David was struggling to adjust to being a junior consultant after years of running his own company. Natalie Brooks had disappeared completely from Portland's marketing scene. The last I'd heard, she'd moved back to Phoenix and was working for a small nonprofit, having apparently decided that corporate marketing held too many risks for someone with her track record. Amanda was waiting for me at the Portland airport, practically bouncing with excitement about the Nike contract she'd closed that morning. "Tell me everything," she demanded, as we drove through the city center toward my house. "Did Microsoft bite? What about Amazon?" "I think we're about to become very busy," I replied, unable to suppress my smile. "And very successful." Define very successful. 25 million in annual revenue by December, offices in 5 cities by next spring, a client roster that reads like a Fortune 500 directory. Amanda pulled over to the side of the road and stared at me. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. We're not just expanding anymore, Amanda. We're taking over." The house felt different when I arrived home that evening. Not empty the way it had after David left, but full of potential. I'd spent the past month redecorating, removing every trace of my former marriage and replacing it with artwork and furniture that reflected my own taste rather than our shared compromises. The guest bedroom that David had supposedly slept in, according to his lies to Natalie, had been converted into a home office where I could work on strategic planning without the distractions of the main office. The master bedroom had been completely redone, with new paint, new furniture, and a king-sized bed that I'd bought simply because I wanted more space to spread out. As I changed into comfortable clothes and poured myself a glass of the expensive wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar Denver area code. Rachel? The voice was David's, but he sounded older, more tired than I remembered. David, this is unexpected. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I needed to call. I heard about the expansion, about the new contracts. Congratulations. I settled into my favorite chair, curious about where this conversation was heading. Thank you. How did you hear about it? LinkedIn mostly. Some of our mutual contacts have been sharing articles about Evergreen's growth. It's impressive, Rachel. Really impressive. Is there something you need, David? He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear voices in the background, as if he were calling from a busy restaurant or bar. I guess I wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not just the corporate speak I used in the divorce proceedings. I've had time to think about what I did, what I threw away, and I realize how badly I screwed up. You realize that 7 months? Too late. I know. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. The affair, the lying, the way I took advantage of your success while undermining our marriage. It was inexcusable. I found myself wondering what had prompted this sudden burst of self-awareness. What brought on this revelation? Honestly, working for someone else again after running my own company for 8 years. It's humbling, and seeing what you've accomplished since we split up. It's made me realize that I was never the successful businessman I thought I was. I was just a mediocre consultant married to a brilliant CEO. The admission was more honest than anything David had said during our marriage. What do you want me to say, David? I don't want you to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that I hope you're happy. Really happy, not just successful. I am happy, I replied, and realized it was completely true. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to do, with people I trust completely. That's good. That's what you deserve. After David hung up, I sat in the quiet of my redecorated living room, thinking about forgiveness and moving forward. I didn't forgive David, not completely, but I no longer carried anger toward him either. He'd become irrelevant to my life, a cautionary tale rather than a source of ongoing pain. The next morning brought news that confirmed my optimism about the Seattle meetings. Microsoft had called before 9 a.m. to schedule a contract signing, followed by Amazon an hour later. By noon, all 5 companies had committed to partnerships with Evergreen, representing exactly the $15 million in new business I'd projected. We need to celebrate, Marcus announced, appearing in my office doorway with a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. It's not even lunchtime, I protested half-heartedly. It's evening somewhere, and we just landed the biggest day in company history. I think champagne is not only appropriate but mandatory. As we toasted our success, I found myself thinking about the parallel universe where David had never cheated, where I'd remained content with steady growth instead of pursuing aggressive expansion. In that universe, Evergreen would still be a regional firm. I'd still be married to a man who didn't respect me, and none of the opportunities we'd seized over the past 6 months would have materialized. You know what the best part is? Marcus said, refilling our glasses. The money? The fact that we did this entirely on our own merits. No family connections, no inherited wealth, no shortcuts. Just hard work, smart strategy, and the courage to take calculated risks. He was right. Everything we'd accomplished had been earned through competence and determination. Unlike David, who'd relied on his wife's success to subsidize his failures, we'd built something genuine and sustainable. That afternoon, I called Amanda to share the news about the Seattle contracts. "All 5?" she asked incredulously. "Rachel, that's insane. In the best possible way." "It gets better. Jennifer just called from LA. She landed the Disney account this morning. 3-year deal worth $6, $2 million annually." "Stop. You're making this up." "I'm absolutely not making this up. We're about to become a $30 million company, Amanda. $30 million in annual revenue, with offices in 5 cities and clients in every major industry." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Amanda spoke again. "You know what this means, don't you? That we're going to be very busy? It means you've built something that will outlast you. Something that employs hundreds of people, serves dozens of major clients, and generates wealth for everyone involved. You've created a legacy, Rachel." The word legacy resonated with me as I ended the call and returned to reviewing expansion. Plans for our next target markets. David had always talked about building a legacy, but his vision had been limited to maintaining a small consulting firm and living comfortably off his wife's success. He'd confused financial stability with meaningful achievement. What I was building was different. Evergreen Marketing Solutions wasn't just a successful business, it was becoming an institution, a company that would continue growing and innovating long after I retired. The people I'd hired weren't just employees, they were partners in creating something larger than any individual contribution. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer in Los Angeles. "Disney meeting went even better than expected. They want to discuss acquiring a minority stake in Evergreen LA. Are you interested in talking acquisition offers?" The question caught me off guard. In just 6 months, we'd grown from a regional marketing firm to a company that major corporations wanted to invest in or acquire. The transformation was dizzying, but it also represented exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been positioning us to receive. I typed back, "Set up a preliminary meeting for next week. I want to hear what they have in mind." As evening approached, I found myself walking through the empty offices of our Portland headquarters, thinking about the journey that had brought us to this point. The betrayal that had initially devastated me had ultimately become the catalyst for the most successful period of my professional life. David's affair had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about our marriage and my own complacency. His financial dependence on my company had shown me how much power I'd been willing to share with someone who didn't deserve it. His lies and manipulation had taught me to trust my instincts and demand complete honesty from the people in my life. Most importantly, his betrayal had freed me from the obligation to consider anyone else's limitations when making decisions about my future. For years, I'd held back from aggressive expansion because David's struggling firm couldn't keep pace with my growth. I'd made compromises in my business strategy to accommodate his ego and his professional insecurities. Now, surrounded by the evidence of what I could accomplish when I stopped making those compromises, I realized that David's greatest gift to me hadn't been his love or his partnership. It had been his betrayal, which had finally given me permission to stop limiting myself for someone else's benefit. The security guard made his evening rounds, nodding respectfully as he passed my office. Through the windows, I could see the lights of Portland stretching out below, a city full of opportunities and challenges that I was finally ready to embrace without reservation. Tomorrow, I would start planning our expansion into San Francisco and Dallas. Next month, I would begin exploring international opportunities in London and Toronto. By the end of the year, Evergreen Marketing Solutions would be operating on 3 continents, serving clients I could barely have imagined working with when David was still part of my life. The revenge I'd initially sought against my cheating husband had evolved into something far more satisfying, A complete transformation of my own potential and a business empire that would outlast any personal relationship. As I finally gathered my things to leave the office, I realized that I no longer thought of myself as the woman whose husband had left her for his secretary. I was the CEO who had turned that betrayal into the motivation for unprecedented success. And that was a much better story to tell. 2 years after David signed those divorce papers, I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse apartment in Manhattan, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and amber. The view stretched across Central Park to the Hudson River, a testament to how far I'd traveled from that devastating night when I'd first overheard his betrayal. Evergreen Marketing Solutions now occupied 4 floors of a prestigious midtown building, our global headquarters overlooking some of the most powerful corporations in the world. What had started as my response to personal betrayal had become something I never could have imagined. A marketing empire worth over $200 million, with offices in 12 cities across 3 continents. "The car's here," called Marcus from inside the apartment, where he was reviewing final preparations for today's board meeting. He'd flown in from London the night before, fresh from closing a deal with Harrods that would make Evergreen the exclusive marketing partner for their international expansion. Today's meeting would determine whether we accepted the acquisition offer from Global Media Consortium, a deal that would value our company at $350 million and make me one of the youngest female billionaires in the marketing industry. It was the kind of success that would have been impossible if I'd remained the complacent wife of a failing consultant. 5 more minutes, I replied, savoring the moment of quiet before what would undoubtedly be a chaotic day of negotiations and decisions. My phone buzzed with a message from Amanda, who was representing our West Coast interests in the acquisition discussions. "Portland team is ready. LA and Seattle divisions have unanimous board approval. This is really happening." Rachel. The thought of selling Evergreen felt bittersweet, but it also represented the completion of a transformation that had begun with David's betrayal. I'd built something so valuable that multinational corporations were competing to own it, and now I had the luxury of choosing what came next. Another message appeared, this one from an unexpected source. "Congratulations on the acquisition news. I saw the announcement in the Wall Street Journal. You deserve every bit of success you've achieved, David." I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling neither anger nor satisfaction, just a mild curiosity about what had prompted him to reach out after 2 years of silence. According to the occasional updates I received through mutual acquaintances, David had rebuilt his career in Denver, working his way up to senior consultant at his cousin's firm. He'd married a woman named Lisa, someone closer to his own age and professional level, and they were apparently building a quiet, conventional life together. I typed back a brief response. "Thank you. I hope you found happiness in Denver." His reply came immediately. "I have. And I hope you know that none of your success surprises me. You were always capable of this. I was just too selfish to see it." The admission might have meant something to me once, but now it felt like ancient history. David had become a minor character in the story of my life, someone whose poor choices had inadvertently set me on a path to extraordinary achievement. Marcus appeared beside me on the balcony, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression he reserved for momentous occasions. "Last chance to change your mind," he said, handing me a cup. "We could walk away from the acquisition, keep building, see how big this thing can really get." "We've built something incredible," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "But we've also built something that can thrive without us. Isn't that the ultimate measure of success?" The acquisition by Global Media Consortium would provide resources for expansion into markets we could never reach alone, while ensuring that the hundreds of people we employed would have security and growth opportunities for decades to come. It was the difference between being a successful entrepreneur and being a responsible steward of something larger than personal ambition. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked as we prepared to leave for the meeting. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the pain of discovering David's affair? Did I regret the months of anger and planning that had followed? Did I regret the aggressive expansion that had consumed 2 years of my life? None, I said finally. Every choice led us here, and here is exactly where I want to be. The Global Media Consortium offices occupied the top 15 floors of a building that scraped the Manhattan sky, their conference room offering panoramic views that made my own penthouse seem modest by comparison. The team assembled around the mahogany table represented some of the most powerful figures in international media and marketing. "Ms. Winters," said Victoria Sterling, GMC's CEO, extending her hand with the confident smile of someone accustomed to acquiring successful companies. "Thank you for considering our proposal. I think you'll find our terms extremely generous." "Generous enough to justify selling something I've spent the last few years building from the ground up," I replied, taking my seat at the table with the poise that came from knowing I held all the leverage in this negotiation. The presentation that followed outlined GMC's vision for Evergreen's future: integration with their existing media properties, expansion into emerging markets, development of new technologies that would revolutionize digital marketing. It was ambitious and well-funded, exactly the kind of partnership that could take Evergreen to levels I could never achieve independently. "The acquisition price reflects not just Evergreen's current value," explained Richard Chen, GMC's chief financial officer, "but our projection of its potential under Global's umbrella. $350 million represents a premium of nearly 40% over comparable companies." "What about operational independence?" asked Marcus, addressing the concern that had kept me awake the previous night. "Evergreen would operate as a wholly owned subsidiary with complete creative and strategic autonomy," Victoria assured us. "We're not looking to micromanage your success. We want to provide resources and remove obstacles." The discussion continued for 3 hours, covering everything from employee retention to international expansion plans. Every question I raised was answered with specificity and confidence, every concern addressed with detailed proposals. "There is one personal matter I'd like to discuss," Victoria said as we moved toward final negotiations. "Your story, Ms. Winters, the transformation from betrayed wife to business mogul. It's become legendary in our industry." I felt a familiar discomfort with the public fascination surrounding my personal life. The media had turned my divorce and business expansion into a modern morality tale, complete with lessons about female empowerment and the dangers of underestimating successful women. "What about it?" "We'd like to develop it into a documentary and potentially a feature film, obviously with your complete creative control and a substantial compensation package." The offer caught me off guard. My story had become public knowledge through business publications and industry profiles, but I'd never considered monetizing the narrative of my marriage's destruction and my subsequent success. "I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that level of exposure," I admitted. "Think about it," Victoria encouraged. "Your experience has inspired countless women to demand better for themselves, both personally and professionally. There's value in sharing that inspiration on a larger scale." After the contracts were signed and the champagne was poured, I found myself standing alone in GMC's executive washroom, staring at my reflection and processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. In the span of 3 hours, I'd become $350 million richer and transitioned from business owner to equity partner in one of the world's largest media conglomerates. The woman looking back at me bore no resemblance to the naive wife who'd trusted David's lies 2 years ago. This woman wore confidence like expensive perfume, commanded rooms full of powerful executives, and made decisions that affected thousands of employees across 3 continents. My phone rang as I prepared to rejoin the celebration. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something prompted me to answer. "Ms. Winters? This is Natalie Brooks. I know this is unexpected, but I was hoping I could speak with you." The voice from my past stopped me cold. I hadn't thought about Natalie in months. having assumed she'd disappeared permanently from my orbit after that awkward confrontation at my house. Natalie, this is certainly unexpected. What can I do for you? I saw the news about the acquisition. Congratulations. I know we didn't part on good terms, but I wanted you to know that watching your success over the past 2 years has been educational. Educational how? I've spent a lot of time thinking about the choices I made, about how naive I was to believe David's lies about your marriage. You were right about everything. He was using both of us, and I was too stupid to see it. I walked to the windows overlooking Manhattan, wondering where this conversation was heading. What are you doing now? I asked. I'm back in school, actually, getting my MBA at Arizona State. I decided that if I was going to work in business, I needed to understand how it actually works instead of just hoping someone would take care of me. The maturity in her voice was striking, a far cry from the desperate young woman who'd shown up at my door demanding explanations. That sounds like a smart decision. I wanted to apologize, really apologize, not just for the affair, but for how I handled everything afterward. You gave me good advice that night at your house about learning from the experience and making better choices. It took me a while to follow it, but I finally did. I appreciate you telling me that. There's something else. I'm writing my thesis on ethical leadership in corporate environments, specifically how personal integrity affects business decision-making. I was wondering if I could interview you about your experience. The request was so unexpected that I almost laughed. Natalie Brooks, the woman who'd helped destroy my marriage, wanted to interview me about business ethics for her graduate thesis. I'm not sure that would be appropriate given our history. I understand. But Ms. Winters, your story isn't just about revenge or getting back at people who wronged you. It's about what happens when someone decides to stop accepting less than they deserve. That's what I'm trying to understand in my research. I found myself considering her request, despite my initial instinctivity to refuse. Perhaps there was value in completing the circle, in helping the woman who'd once represented my greatest betrayal understand the lessons I'd learned from our shared experience. Send me your thesis proposal, I said finally. If it's legitimate, academic research and not tabloid sensationalism, I might be willing to participate. Thank you. That means more than you know. After ending the call, I rejoined the celebration, where Marcus was regaling the GMC executives with stories of our most challenging client acquisitions. The champagne was excellent, the conversation stimulating, and the contracts that would change my life forever were safely signed and witnessed. But my mind kept returning to Natalie's call and her description of my story as being about refusing to accept less than I deserved. It was a simpler and more universal interpretation than the revenge narrative that had captured media attention. 3 months later, I sat in the study of my new home in the Hamptons, reviewing Natalie's completed thesis while preparing for our scheduled interview. Her academic work was impressive, thoroughly researched and thoughtfully argued, focusing on how personal crises could catalyze professional transformation. She arrived precisely on time, dressed professionally, and carrying herself with a confidence that seemed genuine rather than performative. The desperate young woman who'd cried in my living room had been replaced by someone who appeared to have learned from her mistakes. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she said as we settled into comfortable chairs overlooking the garden I'd spent the summer cultivating. "I know it's awkward, given our history." "Your thesis is well written," I acknowledged. "You've clearly put serious thought into the research." The hardest part was being honest about my own role in the case study. It's not easy to admit publicly that you were naive enough to believe a married man's lies about his wife. But you did admit it. That takes courage. We spent 2 hours discussing leadership, integrity, and the relationship between personal growth and professional success. Natalie asked thoughtful questions about my decision-making process, my expansion strategy, and the lessons I'd learned about trusting my instincts. Do you think you would have built Evergreen into what it became if David hadn't cheated? She asked toward the end of our conversation. Honestly, no. I was too comfortable, too willing to accommodate his limitations. His betrayal forced me to stop making compromises and start pursuing my actual potential. So, in a way, we did you a favor. I considered the question carefully. You and David taught me valuable lessons about trust, about the difference between love and convenience, about the importance of building something that belongs entirely to me. Whether that constitutes a favor depends on your perspective. As Natalie prepared to leave, she paused at the door. I hope this doesn't sound presumptuous, but I'm proud of what you accomplished. Not just the business success, but the way you handled everything. You could have destroyed us both, but instead you just let us face the consequences of our own choices. Destroying you wouldn't have built anything, I replied. Success was always going to be a better revenge than ruin. That evening, I walked through my garden as the sun set over the Atlantic, thinking about the conversation and the strange journey that had brought Natalie Brooks back into my life as an academic researcher, studying the very situation she'd helped create. My phone buzzed with a message from Victoria Sterling. Documentary proposal approved by the board. When you're ready to tell your story to the world, we're ready to help you tell it right. I smiled, looking out at the ocean and thinking about the future I was still building, the legacy I was still creating, and the woman I'd become through the ashes of who I used to be. David Calloway had left me for his secretary, believing he could discard me while keeping the benefits of my success. Instead, he'd freed me to become someone he never could have imagined, someone who'd turned his betrayal into the foundation of an empire he'd never be worthy to enter. That was the real story, the one worth telling, and finally, I was ready to tell it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.